Welcome to today's Twitter Spaces. Scaling Solana builders, backers, and believers. I'm DK, Head of Investor Relations at DeFi Development Corporation. First time I get to say that one. And I'll be your host for the next hour. Before we dive in, a quick note today's conversation may include forward looking statements. These involve risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results to differ materially. For a fuller discussion of those risks, please refer to our Form 8K filed and other filings with the SEC. We don't undertake any obligations to update these forward-looking statements. Now, let's get right to it. So, we assembled a stacked lineup over here across the across this whole ecosystem. Got Pantera Capital, Cosmo joining from there, Arrington, got Colton Kelly joining us, and Amelia from Solana should be hopping on as well. Got Adrian over from Kraken, as well as our very own CEO, Joseph Onorati, and COO, Parker White from DeFi Dev Corp. Goal here is to have a candid discussion about where Solana is today, where it's going, and what it means to build, back, and just believe in this ecosystem. So we'll jump right in. I'm going to keep this fairly open-ended. Normally, I like calling on folks individually, but I kind of want you guys to kick around some of these questions, ask follow-ups of one another, and just share some good ideas. So let's start with the obvious one, which is everyone here could allocate to or back any chain, but y'all chose Solana. So why Solana?
Hey DK, thanks for Parker, Joseph. Thanks to everyone for hosting this. It's Cosmo from Pantera. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think this is maybe the fundamental, most interesting question, which is why Solana, why today? I think whenever I try to describe this to our investors, our clients, and others who are asking, it really comes back to I like to backtrack a little bit into the history of blockchain. Blockchain is technology that's been around for decades, right? It's not something new. But the first blockchain, decentralized blockchain that really took off was Bitcoin, and it did something very easy, or very simple, which was transferring value back and forth. And it scaled, it worked, it was great. A very natural reaction to that was, what if we did that, but do more than just transfer value and have smart contracts? And thus Ethereum was born. And then, fast forward a few years, as Ethereum became more congested, it became pretty clear that a lot of people said, hey, we love what Ethereum is doing, but can I get that except faster and better? And thus was born like a whole new generation of other layer ones, including Solana. And as we look at Solana today, it's pretty clear why, if you just look at the metrics, nearly 100% of incremental user growth, more than 50% of incremental developer growth over the last couple of years has come from Solana. And it really begs the question why. And it's because, I come from, for those who don't know me, as I'm sure most of you don't, I come from really a TradFi background, having covered internet equities at a hedge fund for a decade. And it just reminds me of what Jeff Bezos at Amazon always said, which is customers care about three things: it's cheaper, faster, more convenient, and that describes Solana. And so that's it. It's very clarifying for us why Solana is winning, why it's doing so well. Not to say others can't win. We, as Pantera's been around a long time, we love all our children, but certainly Solana has become very special and extremely competitive. And so, and I think the reason is pretty clear.
Hey, this is Colton from Arrington Capital. We I share a lot of those opinions that Cosmo just shared. I think the other thing that's important to note about Solana is they were really one of the first chains that was able to provide this experience with such fast finality and low costs. Even compared to a lot of the competition at the time when Solana was launched, it was really in a league of its own. And the thing that I think they did really well was they were able to use its early mover advantage. That there were a lot of chains that were trying to offer the same thing, but Solana did a fantastic job of building a very unique community and culture, both on the developer side and on the user side. And I think what this ended up doing is it catapulted them to build a an ecosystem on the DeFi side that had deep liquidity, that attracted more developers and started a flywheel. And they've leveraged this incumbency advantage very effectively, to the point where now, if you want to launch a new application, Solana is going to be something that a chain that everybody is looking at, because they know it comes with this built-in user base and this built-in community that you have access to from day one. And so I think you combine that with all of the great technology that Solana has developed, which is really unique and makes for this special user experience. And you get a combination that's pretty powerful. And so that's one of the reasons why we're particularly interested in Solana, is because it's now the high performance fast chain to compete with. And if you're deciding to build an application, whether it's in DeFi or DePIN, you're going to be looking at Solana as probably one of the first places that you evaluate to build as a result of that. So I think the community and culture that they've built and how they've sort of compounded that incumbency advantage is also important.
What I'd add to that also is, I think if you look broadly at all the ecosystems out there, Solana has, this point in time with crypto, we still need the bold risk takers, the big idea people. And I think Solana has that more than many other ecosystems. There's still speculative risk takers. There's still people who want to build and invest in things that have a high rate of failure. That's all part of it. So I think you see a lot of the bolder risk takers happening on Solana within the ecosystem. I also want to give coming on Colton's comments, I'll give a big shout out. I don't know if they've joined yet, but I think the Solana Foundation has done a really fantastic job of engaging with really high quality people across their community, the things that they work with, they invest in, how they've sort of built out their ecosystem and the network that spans across that and the interconnectedness. I think they've just done a really strong job at curating that.
And the one place I would add as well, since we focus extensively on like the retail user experience at Kraken, is that the simplicity and the user friendliness of Solana, I believe, has been one of the main attractors to building that vibrant community that Colton and Kelly have talked about, especially on the retail level, largely because your average retail user may not want to deal with the complexity of bridging between L2s or anything to that effect. And so, everyone being on the same chain, the same L1, and building for user experience, I think has lent itself to that mass retail adoption that Solana has experienced over the last couple of years. And I'd also echo what Kelly said, that it's fantastic to be able to work with the Solana Foundation on their ambitious ideas. So it always feels like you have a partner in working towards whatever use case it is that you believe would be best supported on Solana.
Yeah, super interesting. I do want to go back to a comment, Colton, you had made, which is that Solana's done a really good job of building an ecosystem that is, I would say, like deeply rooted in community and culture, right? I would have previously said deeply rooted in memes, but I think it's obviously much more than that. But it's also deeply technical. And I'm curious if you guys have a view on which one is sort of being more important for mass traction and adoption, or if you really need both. You need something that is like deeply rooted in culture and obviously also deeply technical. And we did have Amelia hop on as well. So Amelia, feel free to chime in if you'd like.
Hey everyone, Amelia. I'm at the Solana Foundation, and I'm a public servant to the Solana network and the infrastructure that powers Solana. Really enjoying being, frankly, just a listener here. I will say we wouldn't be honoring the culture in which Toli has instilled in us if I didn't say that there's just still so much work to do. Not to negate that, I think anyone that's been in this industry for more than a few cycles would acknowledge that sure, a lot of work has contributed to some of the, meaningful outcomes and successes and milestones that you guys have described. I will say I think there is a usefulness in remaining hungry and expecting that we've never really gotten to what might be kind of like a victory or finish line. And from an infrastructure standpoint, I think that's where the foundation really sees the role of Solana being, right? Aside from Bitcoin being a relatively unique outlier as a digital store of value, all networks then are basically competing to be the underlying infrastructure of what we describe as internet capital markets. And that infrastructure is a tremendously complex endeavor. And I'll just share a framework that I use to think about that, which is been described by different folks on the already, which is founders, people that are actually capable of building real businesses, and we track that through kind of like on-chain GDP or revenue, and assets. So that's the actual digital assets that are being traded on the chain. You can't have a capital market without those assets. Money likes money. And applications, right? The utility. Yeah, Adrian mentioned kind of like ease of use, but there's a reason why technology is adopted. We don't use the internet unless there's a reasonable application in which we can source the underlying information or utility. And so the combination of those three things remain, easier said than done, but the infrastructure has to be appealing as a creative surface area for all three of those different entities, human and non-human, in order for there to be a viable way in which we see ourselves as really being the core underlying infrastructure for those future internet capital markets.
I would just chime in here and say, I think the long-term success of Solana is made possible by exceptional technology. But as we live in a very path-dependent world, and having a strong community around memes and culture gives Solana the ability to make sure that that exceptional technology sees the light of day decades from now. And so I think that it's a combination of the two that need to work together. And it's really hard to succeed as a blockchain if you don't have both. I do think there are certain areas of the meme culture on Solana that probably have gone too far, but I would rather have a blockchain ecosystem where we're pushing the limits of what's possible and sort of figuring out where those limits are than not taking risks and not experimenting. So I think that ultimately the core of why we are interested is amazing technology and amazing user experience. And it's really icing on the cake that Solana has such a strong meme culture. And I think that that encourages a lot of builders to come to the space and build infrastructure solutions and applications to help serve that market, which will become very useful for other use cases down the line. And I think we're already starting to see the beginnings of that.
I think to add on to that, from an engineering background, I spent a number of years in engineering at Kraken. Maybe a pretty simple view is just like engineers like working on these problems. Like engineers like optimizing things like latency and how can we shave, milliseconds and seconds off of, confirmation times or transactions landing, that kind of thing. And so when you've got very difficult technical problems that really push the boundary of what's possible rather than just kind of like reorganizing things, as you see a lot going on in EVM land, you just attract like really smart people that want to work on hard problems. And so in some cases, or in some ways, Solana has some really tough problems that we're trying to solve and work on. And so, you just attract the best people to work on the most difficult problems. And the easier your problems are, the lower caliber of people that want to get involved. In some ways, kind of seems a little backwards, but I think that's, oddly enough, an advantage that the Solana ecosystem has going for it, for sure.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious for you guys. I mean, I think a lot of folks obviously will just look at well, maybe different folks have different metrics that they'll look at to sort of assess the health of the ecosystem. And then obviously you sort of have like retail that'll just look at price and price action. But for all of you guys on the call, what are some of the, I'm going to say, KPIs, metrics, things that you sort of look for on an ongoing basis to assess the health of the Solana ecosystem on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, happy to start on this as well. I think, well, look, as an investor, what am I looking for? Ultimately, I believe all assets trade on fundamentals, and that will certainly be true in this asset class as it matures. If it doesn't trade on fundamentals, this asset class won't grow. So it's almost tautologically true. But so if you believe that to be true, then what matters is cash flow production and value creation by the protocol, and that's certainly the end metric that matters the most. But there are a lot of inputs that go into that, and so we care deeply about the what Blockworks calls REV, which we think is a great metric that we work together with them to produce. But what are the metrics that go into that? Well, it's in order to produce cash flow and produce value, that must mean there are users and transactions and applications. And so to take it one step higher, and it's are there interesting applications being built? What is the diversity of those applications? Are they unique to Solana? Are they uniquely new to crypto? And a lot of that research comes from our large venture team and the network we have of talking to startups in the ecosystem. A lot of connections that we're fortunate to be introduced to through the Solana Foundation. And then on the transactions and user side, it's like keeping track of how are transaction trends, how are user trends, and then one step further on top of that is what is the user acquisition what does the user acquisition trend look like? Where are users coming from? Is that a healthy source of new users? Are they high quality new users? Where are areas that we can grow? And so it's sort of uniting all of that are some of the metrics that we care and look at to examine the health of the Solana ecosystem.
I definitely agree with all of those points, especially the point about applications being built and developer activity, because I think even more so than just current cash flow and fundamentals, right now in crypto, these projects are trading off of possible growth. And the best way to figure out which ecosystem is going to grow more is which ecosystem is going to attract the best applications, which are going to retain users in the long run. And so the best thing that we look at is like how many deals are we seeing from each ecosystem and how many developers are building in the ecosystem. There's a lot of public reports that are put out on this activity, and I think that's a precursor to a lot of the fees activity. And you also want to look at retention in downturns as well, because a lot of new developer growth is sort of it's reactive to the price. And so if price goes up, you're going to see new developers, new projects enter the ecosystem. But what really makes an ecosystem stand out is how it weathers downturns. And I think we saw in the last downturn, Solana price went down a lot, but it actually retained a lot of really talented developers. And I think that was the first indication that Solana was going to be here for the long run, is that the people who are building on Solana are really committed to the mission of crypto, of what their protocols have set out to accomplish, and of Solana. And I think that's not very common in the space to have so many hardcore believers like we do in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, given all the, it seems like just a lot of emphasis placed on interesting applications, the types of applications that keep users around. I mean, taking a step back, what types of teams and projects should be building on Solana right now? And are there any types of projects that, or teams that maybe shouldn't be building on Solana? I'm curious for the panel's view on that.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is going to be very simple. Everyone should build on Solana. I mean, I think, everyone that's called Colton, Kelly, and I have talked about all the amazing things of why Solana is better. And it comes down to, again, I like to simplify things because the best theses can be said in a few words. And it's Solana is better, faster, is cheaper, faster, and more convenient. And so if you're a developer looking at the space, and you're looking at worth of incremental growth, well, Solana attracted the most incremental users of any chain. If you're looking for worth of incremental innovation, well, Solana attracted the most incremental new developers and new applications of any other chain. And so it's like it is a pretty general smart contract chain, and so anything can and should try to interact and try to build on Solana.
Yeah, maybe I've
I
got
totally
a
Parker.
I was gonna say maybe I've got a slightly nuanced view there. Um I think building a like if you want to build a corporate L2 or like a corporate kind of semi-walled garden environment, then I think maybe building on Solana is not good for you. I won't name names, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. So maybe just to not really take the contrarian side here, but I think yeah, the openness of the Solana ecosystem and the fact that it is all on one chain does make it kind of hard to build some of these walled gardens. So if you kind of want to do that, you kind of be quasi on chain, but also have some controls in place. Maybe Solana's not the best place.
What I was going to add is I think we probably have enough infrastructure for meme coins on Solana, which might be a hot take. Maybe it's not. I think we're ready for more. I actually kind of disagree with Parker. I think that we could onboard more types of like real world asset permissions tokens onto Solana. And I think that the way that you get around this is if you really do have to have KYC and some controls, you can do it at the address level. And we're seeing some companies build things like this on ETH. And I think that more of it's going to start happening on Solana once people realize the capital markets potential. And the thing that I think is really important about Solana and having a like monolithic ledger where everything can exist is it reduces so much friction for the end user not having to be sending their funds between all these different chains and partitioning it. If instead, you get a passport with your accreditation status, if that's even necessary. I mean, I think a lot of those rules we might want to revisit, but just in the current regime, it would be a lot more convenient if I could have all of my funds on Solana. I could have permission to go interact with all of these new protocols that are popping up that require that. And I don't have to move between a different chain every time I want to access a new app. Because if you have a different walled garden for like every financial institution that wants to use crypto and blockchain, maybe they're saving on back office expenses and taking advantage of that value prop that crypto has, but they're missing out on so much more, which I think is the composability and permissionlessness that crypto enables, which is really important to the user experience and a large reason why people chose Solana in the first place.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if Joseph would agree about us having enough infrastructure for meme coins on Solana, but I won't speak for him. I'm curious for you guys. I mean, anything in the last 6 months that's been built that's particularly exciting that you'd call out?
DeFi Dev Corp. I love that there are more companies, more traditional institutional investors that are interested in Solana, and that there are very awesome experiments in how to increase Solana adoption going on, including by the likes of this great company, DeFi Development Corporation. I think it's really important that more and more people learn about Solana. As Colton said earlier, these are all growth stories. It's all about adoption and increasing awareness, increasing penetration. And one great way to do that is through a public company vehicle that gives you just much more awareness and credibility. And so I'm very excited for anything that increases Solana's brand awareness. It's been really exciting to see the amount of traction that Solana has gotten, or DeFi Development Corporation has gotten in the public markets, because that really speaks to what I hear all the time talking to our endowment clients, our institution clients, our pension clients. They care deeply about finding tokens that have real fundamentals outside of just Bitcoin as digital gold. And Solana is by far the second most mentioned thing after Bitcoin, after a distant second to Bitcoin, but like after Bitcoin. and certainly more than anything else. And it's great to see that play out in the real world and not just in talk.
As long as
I,
as long as Solana is the second most mentioned, then there's definitely still work to do, huh? Um, I would say, you know, in the last 6 months, this isn't necessarily a net new development, but something that we've actually seen receive adoption is going to be the new token program on Solana called Token 22 is the kind of like technical term, but really the way that it's referred to
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
broadly is network or token extensions, which was largely designed intentionally to enable more configurability for the composability to stay, of course, on the L1, but that there's enough functionality for people that are designing more advanced instruments, for instance, at the token level, or have more requirements permissioning at the account level to be able to configure them to their needs. One specific example of token extensions that I'm particularly keen about is confidential balances. And so we've seen, you know, quote unquote institutions like PayPal adopt the ability to set up a stablecoin that has the ability to keep balances confidential, which is unique for blockchain given its transparency, but important for adoption given the UX and regulatory requirements for privacy. And there are a number of different ways. You know, the token extension library is probably 10 or 12 in which those things can be applied individually or together to create, you know, totally custom new ways of deploying tokens on Solana, which includes the broad and very quickly growing category of tokenization of, you know, what I would say just about everything. And so I think that's a particularly exciting development. And then the other thing is, you know, we have been working for years on multiple clients, the ecosystem has, and now we're starting to see a growing number of clients outside of the original be deployed across validators in our infrastructure. And then, of course, there's been a lot of talk about FireDancer, Frankendancer. That client is now live, but the full deployment of FireDancer will be, you know, upcoming and add exciting new developments to the chain as well.
one area I'm also partial to is, and it's not necessarily like a new product, but I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Amelia, the growth in stablecoin TVL on Solana over the last 6 months has been really exciting, and I think it's the result of a very concerted effort by the Solana Foundation and many partners who view Solana as a viable chain for payments and commerce broadly, but done via stablecoins. And I think, you know, I'm partial to it because together we've worked on a stablecoin, USDG, but just generally speaking, it's been an exciting space to see how quickly TVL has been able to grow on Solana as a result of those efforts.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on the stablecoin piece. You know, we did, Joseph and I did part of our transaction with Blake at Janover. We did part of it in stablecoins and part in a wire. And the headache that we went through doing a wire, it was just, it's so crystallized why we're here and why, I mean, just the one facet of the ecosystem, stables on a much better rail. It just, I mean, it makes everyone's life better. It's not you don't have to be into crypto. You don't have to believe that digital gold is valuable and hold Bitcoin. You don't have to believe in DeFi or anything, but it's just like objectively easier to send $1 billion worth of stables than it is to send a wire. And it's just no comparison. And so I think as we see more and more applications like that, where it's just straight up purely a better experience on chain on Solana, then, you know, you're just going to have more adoption. You're going to have adoption from normies that just do not care about the chain and the backend infrastructure. They just want their app to work. They want the thing that they want to do to be easy. And, you know, I think stablecoins are, you know, a very interesting use case there. And, you know, to date, most stablecoin usage has been Tether on Tron, which His Highness is great and all, but like I prefer the world's dollar denominated, euro dollar infrastructure not to be run by a couple servers based in Hong Kong or wherever. So I think Solana kind of taking that mantle as the dominant layer for payments with stablecoins is a pretty exciting development.
All right, I love it. I'm so glad that Amelia had mentioned confidential balances. I think it's like a nice segue into my next question here, which was on institutional adoption and access. Particularly, I wanted to ask the panel here, what infrastructure gaps still exist for Solana to become an institutional grade platform? Or maybe another way to look at it is, are we well past that? And if so, what are the other considerations that folks should think about with respect to broader institutional adoption?
I would say that at the infrastructure layer, confidentiality is really the only thing that is missing at this point. I think that Solana can handle the load that would come along with onboarding a lot of these institutions, and all of the development infrastructure is already there to build amazing applications. I think that maybe what does need to be worked on is you could build applications on top of Solana to deal with a lot of the permissioning and KYC that needs to happen. And that could be kind of proof of personhood type projects, or things that are able to help span that gap to get institutions comfortable with dipping their toes in. And I think that's actually pretty easy to do. And there's a lot of projects that already do this in various ecosystems. So I think we're pretty close. The main thing that Solana is going to have to do is sort of compete against the EVM ecosystem and convince an institution why you should go with Solana over an L2, sort of like what Parker had mentioned earlier. That's the decision that they're all making. And I think that the pitch from Solana just needs to be, hey, you're going to get net new users if you come to Solana, and you're not going to get that if you start your own L2 from scratch. And so I think that's going to be a compelling pitch, and there's going to be a lot of institutions that decide to choose Solana as a result. But infrastructure wise, I think we're already just about there.
Another point I'd make is I think time, unfortunately, for better or worse. I think, some large institutions, and maybe this is more from a capital allocation standpoint, wanting to invest, but like, money and investments are kind of lindy, right? Like, the longer it's been around, people just assume that it's gonna, it's more solid, more stable, more likely to be around in the future. And so I think that's the advantage that Bitcoin has. And frankly, that's also the advantage that, the Ethereum ecosystem has, is that it's just been around for a while. And so there's strong network effects, and it's kind of tough to dethrone, someone that came many, many years before. And it just takes a lot of hard work, and like continuing to pound the table on the marketing front, and then also just continuing to, in every area, have a little bit better user experience, whether that's for developers or actual users. I'm sure Amelia has something to add on to this, but I think it's a long road of just grinding your way to the top, walking up the mountain, and it just kind of takes time.
Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting about this industry, as I kind of reflect broadly, is, institutions are often described as these kind of like monolithic ideas, or, capital holders. And one of the things that I think everyone on this call has been maybe surprised by at one point or another in our careers is, that's not actually necessarily a meaningful way to divide the capital allocation that can happen on chain. Retail plays an incredibly strong role in the on-chain economy, and always has, and has really been the kind of like first to market for a lot of the things that have ultimately been developed. Individual bag holders can be as powerful or more powerful than institutions, and that's largely because they were early adopters. And so one differentiation that I think is interesting is, maybe in traditional SaaS, you would be able to create kind of like SMB, enterprise, institution level categories with, bands associated with them. And there isn't as clear of a differentiation in the way you can segment between quote unquote retail and institutions. With that being said, one of the things that I think has likely evolved naturally, just as you quote unquote follow the money, is it makes sense to build for retail. They're the ones that are actively participating in the market, right? When we were talking earlier about DApp revenue as being an important KPI for an ecosystem, you see exactly what that's created, right? And I think one of the things that's been difficult for quote unquote institutions, and I define retail as invest for themselves and institutions as invest for others, is there's been a ton, as we know, of regulatory and compliance reasons, very valid reasons why they couldn't be involved. And I think that that is absolutely starting to change. And one of the things that's particularly interesting is as those kind of macro conditions change, there will likely need to be institutional builders. And I think the development starting from within the institution for their own audience, for their own needs, deploying things like token extensions is absolutely going to unlock a totally new set of requirements and capabilities using Solana's infrastructure.
Yeah, it's super interesting. All right, guys. Well, sorry, go ahead, Parker.
I was going to jump in real quick. Sorry to put you on the spot, Kelly, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this topic.
Sorry, guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, listen, I think, when you look across it, there's been, I think DK or Parker, someone was talking earlier about, Solana was born at a lot of times when it was very different than the competition. And I think that's true, but I do think that generation of sort of core foundational blockchains, there have been a lot of them, and they've all evolved very differently. And a lot of them are still alive, right? A lot of them still exist in some form or another, some more successful than others, arguably Solana the most successful. And I think when you look at that outside looking into crypto, I think that really matters, and I think legacy starts to matter. And if you've stood through a lot of the things that have happened over the past number of years, I think that's really important. And you've been able to come through that stronger, better, more resilient, still having sort of the community vibe and the overall brand of innovation and continued momentum. I think that's really important, even if, even for institutions looking at what's there. And I think that institutions are looking at a lot of those older legacy chains because they're more accessible. There's more going on. They've been around for longer, like through some lenses. Why do we need another L1 that's launching in 2 months? I think that could be a question versus what's there and some of the stuff that's already existing. So I think just what the legacy that Solana's had and what it's done and how it's performed and how it's grown and how it's continued to innovate and created a brand for itself. And I know I'm leaning heavily into sort of broadly speaking. Colton's far more technical than I am, but from a brand and market perspective and where they've been involved and how the foundation's been able to engage with the right groups across the entire Web3 community is something very unique.
Yeah, I think two other maybe nuances I'd add to this conversation about institutional adoption is that, and is that one is that like you have to understand the sales cycle for large institutions, and to Amelia's point, like different institutions are very different, and we can't treat them as one monolithic whole. But in general, when you get into talking about 1,000 people, 5,000 people organizations, there's a lot of hoops to run through for something to get picked up as a partner. It takes a lot of time, and so these can be 2, 3, 4 year things. And so if you look today, and it seems like Solana is now starting to get some positive news flow, whether that's with BlackRock Biddle or whether that's Visa, like these are all many multi-year projects, but the what that implies that there may actually be, and it's very fair for the Solana Foundation to be coy about this, a lot of other conversations in the background that started a year ago, 2 years ago, or maybe starting now that will bear fruit in the next few years, because Solana is at a point where it does have that credibility, that the tech is there, and the history and legacy is there. And so they're already, quietly, without us seeing it, there are definitely, it would not be surprising to believe that there's a lot of adoption already happening. It just takes a long time for these guys to act. And so, and then the second point I make is that, if we think about where we are as an industry, we're just so early. There's maybe 10 million outside of Bitcoin. There's maybe 10 million users on chain, probably not even. And so we're, call it, less than 1% penetrated of the global TAM. And in that context, no one's market share lead matters. All that matters is where you are, how you compare on an absolute basis today. And so a lot of people think Solana, may not be the leading chain in enterprise adoption, but in the context of there's 100x of growth going forward, nothing matters about what happened in the past. All that matters is if you can grab that incremental share growth, and there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that that is happening for Solana.
Cosmo is a former internet analyst. I feel like you and I are speaking the same language in a lot of this stuff. It's super interesting. I'm curious for the panel, what's still misunderstood about Solana? And is there anything, any risks, anything that particularly keeps you up at night? But I'm curious, like, if there's any narratives out there that you think are sort of like uninformed or just generally misunderstood.
I'll jump in real quick. I think the meme of, Solana breaks, Solana goes down is still floating around out there a little bit. I don't think people realize during a Trump token weekend, the Solana chain processed more transactions and did more volume than Kraken, Coinbase, Binance, and all of EVM combined. If Kraken had sustained that level of activity, guaranteed it would have gone down. Same for Coinbase. And so the fact that the network, sure, there's some problems with Jito and problems with transactions landing, but actually the network stayed up. I think that is solid proof that the outage demons, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't jinx things here. I've got a wooden desk, so I'll do some knocking. But I think the meme of, hey, Solana breaks when you need it most, and the chain always halts and goes down is still floating around out there a little bit.
Colt and Cosmo, curious if you have any takes on misunderstandings about Solana or uninformed narratives.
I think maybe one of the biggest misunderstandings is that Solana is just a meme coin chain. And that's because if you look at the companies that are doing the most on-chain revenue right now and protocols that are doing the most on-chain revenue, for the past year, it was all of the meme coin related projects or projects that benefited somehow from that via DeFi. And on the venture side, we're seeing a bunch of deals, especially in the DePIN and the AI space, that are really legitimate projects that aren't being done anywhere else that we've seen. So, just a few examples on the DePIN side, we've seen a number of projects that are enabling the creation of novel data sets that can be used for all kinds of different applications and training AI, like weather data, noise pollution data, air quality data, flight tracking. We've seen a huge gambit of that. You've got Hive Mapper. You've got a number of compute projects like IONET, Render, etc., that are solving real problems and creating real value. And Solana is one of the ecosystems where we see that accelerating the most. So I think the story of the next couple of years is going to be that Solana is a whole lot more than just a meme coin chain, and that there's a lot of really cool applications that are being spun up. And you'll also see, I think, AI agents projects had their hype moment a couple of months ago, but there's a lot of teams that are still heads down building and actually doing more than launching a token with an AI domain name. There's going to be a lot of really cool projects that come out on Solana, and it uniquely makes these possible because of how much load and the speed at which Solana can operate and the cost for doing these transactions. Because as you have all of these agents popping up, they're going to be doing more transactions than a human would. And you need a chain that's able to handle that. And we think that's Solana.
Yeah, the narratives of crypto have always, both fueled, been our best friend and our worst enemy, right? For all of us, regardless of where you sit. They are just an essential part of the world that we live in. I feel pretty mixed that narratives are something that you can ever really control. And I think the kind of like question around misunderstanding often derives from the narrative du jour. But from my perspective, it's not about what you should build on Solana, which is kind of the question, which is like, is Solana the meme coin chain? It's about what you can build on Solana, right? Because of the underlying performance, because of the block space, because of the compute, because of the low latency, right? And so if we look back, there have been versions of this that have been deemed disastrous for Solana for a long time. First, it was the DeFi chain, then it was the NFT chain, then it was the gaming chain. For a brief moment, it was the DePIN chain. That was a glorious one, Colton. All the example teams that you brought up are, DePIN rock stars. Now we're the quote unquote meme chain, right? And so if you look at those in aggregate, really what that describes to me is not that Solana needs to find a niche. It is the underlying infrastructure in which the interests of the open and free market can be built. And I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that because I know that the market will dictate the next version of that. And the only responsibility of Solana infrastructure is to be able to support that next wave of interest and demand.
Yeah, I really love that, Amelia. And I want to put maybe a slight finer point on it, which is that, and I thought you were going down, which is that almost everything she said just now, it's like every few months there's a new narrative du jour, but it's always on Solana, right? And so that is the, I think, most important thing, and most important takeaway is that developers are already choosing to build things on Solana. And there's this big misunderstanding that Solana is only one thing at a time, when in reality, in totality, it's actually, that is where the incremental innovation is going. When I zoom out and think about where I want to spend my time as an investor, 90% of my time is probably spent thinking about DePIN and AI, because I try to spend my time on places where I think we can create real world value. And any DePIN protocol, any AI protocol is building on Solana. Even the AI agents that started on Base migrated to Solana very quickly. There's just this very clear recognition that is the hub of where all the innovation going. Even if it doesn't start there, it ends up finding its way to Solana. And so that is, I think, a very, very interesting and important thing to say.
I'm tempted to make a joke about how it takes LLMs time to learn.
Yeah,
that can happen.
And then maybe one more misunderstanding, because I know Joseph hasn't been called out enough, is that I think a lot of people are poo-pooing on the meme coin craze, and I absolutely do not. Like, there's this sense that meme coins got too big and like it's unsustainable. I really view meme coins as, it's just a form of gambling, right? And you can have your moral right or wrong, whatever. I don't really care as an investor. I just look at the facts, which are that gambling has been around for millennia, like ever since humans were rolling animal knuckles and like thousands of years ago. And so gambling is intrinsic to human nature and is a market that will forever be available. If you look at global gaming, it's a $400 billion industry, right? And if you look at the total, cash flow produced / losses realized by users on Solana meme coin trading, it's on the order of $3 or $4 billion annualized, which is only 1% penetration of the global gaming market. And if you think about, so that tells me that there's actually, could Solana be 10% of global gambling? Yeah, why not, right? Especially as more and more people are online, which they will be, and more young people who are the ones doing this grow and age and become more wealthy. And so it's very clear to me that, look, gambling goes through phases, it's very cyclical, but that is actually a very sustainable end market that could grow many magnitudes from here. So Joseph, you can keep on trading your meme coins.
Thank you. Amazing. I was never going to stop. But I don't actually, I mean, certainly much of the activity with meme coins is actually about gambling, and so is trading, I think. But what draws me to these things is the communities. And like, yeah, everybody's like trying to get rich together maybe, but I don't know, kind of the relationships that you make in those communities. I think the ones that are, kind of have sticking power are the ones when the token's down, right? And we kind of see this with NFTs as well. So I don't know. I guess my thesis on meme coins is probably more about community than about gambling. But I think gambling's probably the the big first draw. Come for the gambling, stay for the community.
Well, maybe there's actually a point to be made there that like gambling is not just about like winning or losing money. It really is about having a good time. Like unfortunately I'm not the guy that trades meme coins and slings them in my free time, but when I talk to the analysts on my team and their friends, it's pretty clear the new form of entertainment is like bunch of guys get together, crack open some beers, and like trade meme coins for fun. Like that is gambling is a form of entertainment. There's nothing I think morally right or wrong about that, and it is a form of community building because that's what entertainment is. So I do think those are actually very united. One just happens to take on a more pejorative sense in our culture for one reason or another, whereas the other is more pro social. But the reality is it's a form of entertainment, which is very pro social.
We've got to go out for beers and launch the Solana Jesus meme coin, Cosmo. That's a great idea.
My body is ready.
All right, folks. We've got about 8 minutes left here, so I actually want to leave off with some like hot takes here, which is just one bold prediction for Solana over the next 12 months. And you're not allowed to give a price target here. We need to talk specifically about ecosystem, maybe some application that really takes off. Just want one bold prediction or thing that you're watching for over the next 12 months.
All right, I can go first.
Easy.
Oh, maybe Parker's got it. All right, mine's kind of...
Joseph, I bet we might be saying the same thing. Go for it.
Uh-oh. Mine might be a little boring. So we named the company DeFi Development Corp. There's a reason for it. I think decentralized finance is the sort of primary growth application for blockchains in the shorter term. Maybe I'm biased. And I expect a strong DeFi narrative over the next 12 months on Solana.
Okay. All right. Maybe this is spicy, but I think Sol will flip ETH.
Ooh, I love that one. I love that one.
I mean, mine is a slight derivative of that, but I think Solana ETFs launch this year and they easily overtake ETH inflows in total amount.
I think DeFi Development Corp will hold more Solana than ETH ETFs hold ETH.
Oh, yeah, that's my favorite one.
That's a
bold.
great one. That's a great one.
We'll do our best.
Kelly, do you have a bold prediction?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't. I think there've been some good ones here. I think Sol flipping ETH is not out of the question. I do think that Solana will have some application that's a little more consumer focused oriented that will bring more people in. I'm not sure they'll realize it or not, but I think there'll be some consumer based thing that blows up on Solana.
I think the test for all infrastructure is going to be most measured by stablecoin volume and stablecoin transaction and stablecoin adoption. And so that is the test that I'm most interested in seeing Solana pass and win for the kind of like global payments economy.
Okay. There you have it, folks. Anything else you'd want listeners to walk away with here? If there's anything that you would shout out.
Well, this doesn't have to be what we end on, but thank you very much to the other speakers for attending. I think this is awesome. Really appreciate y'all showing up. Thank you to everybody who is here listening as well. Also appreciate y'all showing up. I think this is a lot of fun. very educational for me. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in, and be on the lookout for Solana Jesus meme coin that Cosmo and I will inevitably get to at some point. And I know the spaces is recorded. Feel free to go back, re-listen, and thanks for joining. Be on the lookout for the next one.
Thanks for hosting, team.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.